Welcome to the Voices of Business, a Santa Clarita Valley Chamber of Commerce podcast. This is a special simulcast, so some folks who are listening to this on the TP&R feed, it's a special simulcast with Scan Media's national program, talking politics and religion without killing each other. It is nice to be with you. I am your host, Corey Nathan. My co-host, my pal and partner in commerce, Joshua Maddox, is actually part of a team that's currently testing the world's first working time travel machine. That's the rumor. I believe it. So hopefully he'll be back from whatever point in time they travel to, so he can join us on the next episode of Voices of Business and bring back tales of the 31st century. Okay, so yes, we are doing a combo episode of the Voices of Business and talking politics and religion without killing each other. So what we're going to do is have a great conversation with today's special guest about her personal background, her impressive career trajectory as a leader in business, in the nonprofit sector, and what made her to get into politics. And that's when we'll wind down our Voices of Business conversation, just so you know what's coming. But for those who are interested in politics and religion, without killing each other, of course, we'll get into some of that juicy stuff on the TP&R feed. And we'll put links on each of the show notes so the Voices of Business folks can find the national show and the TP&R folks can find the Voices of Business feed. But before we dive in, it'd be great if you could hit that subscribe or follow button on your podcast app for both of these shows, and definitely give us a good rating and leave a review. It helps. It really does, so that we can get the word out and more people can participate in these conversations like the one we're having today with Suzette Valladares. Suzette Valladares serves as executive director of a nonprofit organization that partners with law enforcement to invest in youth. She was elected to the California State Assembly in 2020, serving until 2022, and was one of the founders of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, of which I am an unabashed fan. In the State Assembly, Suzette brought vaccine clinics to her community, my community, early in the pandemic, and co-authored landmark legislation providing access to preschool starting at age 4. Suzette grew up in the Santa Clarita Valley and worked her first part-time job at Six Flags Magic Mountain. In 2012, Suzette left the public sector and became executive director of Southern California Autism Speaks. And after her mother's passing in 2018, Suzette was asked to assume her mother's role as an educator and ran Little Steps of Faith, a faith-based nonprofit preschool that provides quality childcare to underserved families in the San Fernando and Santa Clarita Valleys. And now Suzette is running for the California State Senate in the 23rd Senate District, which has been held by a friend of this show, Scott Wilk, who's terming out of that seat. Suzette, it is great to be with you. How you doing?
Hello, Corey. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me on. I know it took us a little while to get this scheduled, but I'm so super excited to have what I'm thinking is going to be a really exciting conversation here. But first off,
Yes.
Did you cut your hair?
I did.
It looks awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. In fact, wait, can you see on the back shelf there?
Yeah. Is that your hair? No.
That's my hair. That's my hair. In case we want to do like a Hamilton or James Madison wig or something like that. Yeah, it was so much hair. They snipped it off and bam, I lost 5 pounds right there.
Oh my goodness. It looks great. I don't think I realized how curly it was. I know you had a little bit of curl in your ponytail there, but it looks great. It's a new you. It's
a new me. Yeah. I'm trying to pretend to be respectable, so that I can hang with respectable folks like you. So
are you going to run for office? Is that what you're doing? Is that what you're
I can neither confirm nor deny those reports. If our area can put up with a Bible thumping Christian who drinks and curses and plays poker, then maybe there's hope for me yet.
Hey, they elected me.
There you go. Okay, so I have questions when we stop recording now. Now I have more questions for the behind the scenes episode. But in all seriousness, we've seen each other a lot around town at nonprofits that we support, at charity dinners and just community functions, and it's always great running into you. I don't think we've ever talked about your family background. I was really fascinated to hear part of your family's been in California for over 100 years. So could you tell us a little bit more about your family history?
Yeah, you know what? So obviously with the name Suzette Martinez Valladares, it's, should be very well known at this point. I am Latina. I have a large Latino family. However, on my dad's side, I'm actually fourth generation Latino. So my great grandparents were from Mexico and Texas and first came to California in 1911 and 1917. They
Wow.
came to Kern County, to Bakersfield. So my grandmother was actually born in Arvin. My grandfather was born in Georgia. My dad was born in Bakersfield. So they actually grew up during the labor movement, with Cesar Chavez. They worked in the fields under the horrific working conditions, during the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And on my mom's side, she is first generation American. Her mom's from Mexico. Her father is from Puerto Rico. So I have a nice little spicy blend of Mexican, Puerto Rican, but I'm 100% American.
Right on, right on. So 1911 and 1917, do you know the circumstances under which your family decided to move to the States, to California?
Yeah, it's for opportunity. My on both sides of my family, actually, they're Mexico at the time had been ridden with war after war. It seemed like there was a war every, couple of decades there. And they're looking for opportunity and, the California dream. They came to America and to California specifically for the California dream, for work, right? To create a better life for their kids. And, my great grandmother by way of Texas, similarly met my grandfather in Mexico, my great grandfather. And then they moved to California for opportunity within agriculture because there were jobs here in California for people who were looking to work.
Yeah, yeah. And I was kind of inspired. I heard the story about you're not the first woman in your family to be active in the community and political movements. Your grandmother worked alongside Cesar Chavez. Is that what inspired you to consider ways you could make an impact socially or politically?
Yeah. So my grandmother. So my father's mother was very influential. She was definitely the matriarch of our family in so many ways. From, her story is really cool. So she was born and raised Catholic in the Central Valley. When she left, well, she decided to leave the Catholic Church. I believe we go back and forth with my dad on whether or not it was the Pentecostal church or the Foursquare Church that she found and fell in love with, and
Mm.
was became a born again Christian. So she left the Catholic Church, and her father, who was very Catholic, literally beat her.
Oh,
And, it was not okay for her to leave the Catholic Church. Well, she continued, to grow in her walk with the Lord, eventually converted, she was one of 11 sisters.
oh, wow.
All of her 11 sisters became born again. So it was very influential in my family and, of course, in my upbringing too, in our Christian values and foundation. But yes, also, worked in the fields. And when I say she worked along Cesar Chavez, it wasn't necessarily in the labor movement. It
Yeah.
was on the ground,
Oh,
toiling the soil, picking grapes. And I actually believe it was in the factories where she worked with him in the factories. Um, so she was a really dynamic, strong woman. And, I remember when I was really little, there was a few formative moments for me, particularly with my grandmother. I was probably, I don't, maybe 5, 6, 7, and that really young, you kind of remember years. And there was a little kid that had gotten hit. My grandmother lived right around the school. I could walk to my school from my grandma's house. There was a little kid that got hit by an ice cream truck.
oh,
And my grandmother worked with the community to eventually pass an ordinance which prohibited ice cream trucks from selling within a certain amount of feet from elementary schools in our neighborhood. And that was really formative for me to see my grandmother be able to, speak her mind, identify an issue, come up with a solution, and then actually engage people and voters to make a difference was really cool to see at a really young age. So yeah, she was a very formative, and the vocal Suzette Valladares, Martinez Valladares. Yeah.
that's awesome. So the seed was planted in you very early on. So you grew up in Santa Clarita, and did you go to school, college,
Yeah.
and all that in Santa Clarita as well?
Yeah. So I actually grew up in Sylmar.
Okay.
I was born at Granada Hills Hospital in Granada Hills. That hospital is actually no longer there. I think it's like the Granada Hills High football field now. I could be wrong, but it's in that area.
Yeah.
And however, though, I grew up coming to Santa Clarita to go to the mall, to go to the movie theater. I mean, there was actually a movie theater on Cinema Drive for those of you in Santa Clarita that don't know that.
Yeah.
Um, no longer anymore. And my first job was at Six Flags Magic Mountain. So working at Six Flags has kind of become a rite of passage, I think, in our region.
Yeah.
But I really became an adult there. I went to college at the Canyons. All of my friends were from Santa Clarita. Ended up moving there, I think, in 2004. So yes, grew up in Santa Clarita, but really kind of throughout the 23rd Senate District, actually, because I have family that live in Lancaster, Palmdale area, and even family from San Bernardino, which happen to be very similar to the boundaries of the new Senate seat that I'm running for.
Yeah. Now, so backing up to your education, by the time you started going to COC, did you have a sense of what direction you wanted to go, whether it was business or politics, or did you have any clarity on that by the time you were starting COC?
Yes. So I knew, right out of my high school, I went to Sylmar High School. It, wasn't the best, but wasn't the worst. We had an exceptionally high dropout rate. For me, there were, I think, 3 of my friends had babies before 11th grade. All of the odds were kind of stacked up against me, I would say. My counselors didn't talk to me about college. My parents, my mom, my mom graduated high school. My dad never graduated high school, but he built an engine to his 57 Chevy when he was 15 years old. So worked well with his hands. And my parents didn't know really how to guide me in terms of education, yet alone a professional career. So I knew I wasn't going to be, college bound right out of high school, which is why I decided to go to College of the Canyons. And while I was at College of the Canyons, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer.
Oh.
And that was what I wanted to do. And I eventually, I studied political science there, or social science, actually, at the time. There was only an AA in social science. I studied social science, eventually transferred, and while I was at CSUN, I transferred to CSUN. While I was at CSUN, I ended up applying for an internship with Congressman Buck McKeon, who was a former congressman from the area. And when I was working for him, I got what I call is like the political bug, but would come to find out later, it was really the advocacy bug. So working for Buck, our community is so unique, and that we have so many nonprofits that really step up to the plate to address our community's issues. And when I was working for him and meeting the nonprofit leaders, the business leaders, I fell in love with their work. Simultaneously, while I was working for Buck, I had a niece that was diagnosed as severely developmentally delayed, nonverbal, and on the autism spectrum. And, this little girl, 2.5 years old, didn't have one word in her vocabulary.
Mm.
And I remember one day she was sitting in the back of my mom's car. She was asleep, and she started crying out of nowhere. And I leaned back to comfort her, and her skin is freezing. Well, she couldn't articulate that she was cold. So I got, my sweater and put it on her lap, and she calmed down. She was diagnosed, and just seeing that diagnosis, seeing her go through early intervention services and become a little chatterbox who I joke has not stopped talking to this day, was like watching a little miracle happen before my eyes. And that is really what kind of catapulted that experience, her intervention. Her transformation is what catapulted my nonprofit work. So I decided I had an opportunity to go work in early childhood education advocacy. It was during the Preschool for All initiative during the Obama administration years, which was, I was a Republican that was very vocal about supporting childcare, supporting preschool, which was not popular amongst Republicans at that time. But I had seen what, one, a diagnosis, and what, two, early intervention and early education professionals, just how they can make a difference in the life of children. So I became a huge advocate. And that's where my nonprofit, that's where the nonprofits got me. And, I had left Buck's office and came to this realization that you can impact change on even the smallest issues, and got that bone, and eventually, or got that, bug. Eventually went on to be the executive director at Autism Speaks, which was a phenomenal experience for me. So, ultimately in 2018, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Oh,
He had started a nonprofit childcare center about 5 years prior. And here I had early learning experience working for LA Up and then nonprofit management experience. I was a mom of a toddler at the time myself. And the board was like, listen, this is your mom's legacy. Like we need you to step up and run the childcare center. So in 2018, to carry on mom's legacy, I became the administrator and it's a nonprofit, but owned that small business as a small business person, Little Steps of Faith Preschool, and would go on to do work with LAPD, Devonshire Pals, most recently. I just have a real passion for impacting change in the life of kids and youth and the most vulnerable through nonprofit work. And I think it's an important part of what my upbringing and values of Santa Clarita have taught me, is to give back through working for nonprofits.
that's awesome. I love hearing about your how you served in in nonprofits and what motivated you to get into that. I was also curious about your political philosophy. Was it working for Congressman Buck McKeon where you started to crystallize your own political leanings, or did that happen earlier on? Because I know you've described yourself as a fiscal conservative, but I also know you to be, a lot of my friends who lean left and don't have a ton of friends who are Republicans, let alone Republicans who've served in elected office. They have an image of what they think of Republicans. I don't see you that way. I see you as having certain political values or political philosophies and personal values, and you are a Republican. But when did you start to develop that philosophy and those kind of beliefs in terms of, for example, the fiscal conservatism?
Yeah. So two things. I think that from the fiscal conservative side, my dad, as I mentioned, was a small business owner. Never graduated high school, but he worked hard. Like I said, he built his first engine for a 57 Chevy when he was 15 years old, continued to work on cars, build cars, was an entrepreneur. I think it's just because he's never liked really having bosses, but that's besides the point. He just kind of taught me the value of hard work and mastering a skill and making money off of that skill, but also, seeing how hard he worked and the struggles that he would go through from a business perspective, whether it was paying taxes on inventory or, payroll taxes, just all of these issues that as a kid, I'm like, my dad works so hard, and it seems like it's getting harder and harder for him to do business in this state. So that is kind of was like, okay, what's this like fiscal conservatism about? I mean, as I mentioned, I was born and raised Christian. So I actually grew up and still consider myself personally a conservative Christian, but I'm also somebody who understands and respects the Constitution and the pillars that our country was built on, and what the intent of our founding fathers was. And for me, I lean much more on the libertarian side of things, whereas, government should not be involved in our daily lives. Government has basic responsibilities. And outside of those basic responsibilities, we as individuals, and this is, I think, where I differ from a lot of my even moderate Democrat friends, is I believe in the power in protecting the individual. And that means that, I want you to be able to live the life that you choose, so long as you're not impeding on the rights of others.
Right.
And that's, I like to try and be as consistent as I can with saying that government should stay out of our personal issues, which is, I think that kind of developed as I started to understand the protections that we're given as individuals are protections that should be extended to everyone. That's what the Constitution says.
Right. Yeah. The piece that you wrote for The Signal, where you were addressing the protests on college campuses, was a really great example of what your beliefs are. And it was a great opportunity for all of us to think through, okay, so we believe in those basic freedoms articulated in the First Amendment, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of speech, the freedom of redress of grievances, while also respecting the fact that others had their freedoms too. And to the extent that these protests blocked others from their own freedoms, the freedom basically walk to class and take a class,
Yep.
the class that they were registered for. It was a really interesting study. So I really enjoyed your piece in the Signal. I was also curious, you've been a leader. It seems like you've been a leader since you came out of the womb. but
Thank you.
now I really like to get to know Charlotte, because I suspect that she's asserting some of those same qualities. But were there folks who you were particularly influenced by, like when you worked for Congressman Buck McKeon, or were there others that that you were influenced by to help you develop as the leader that you are today?
Yeah, I am constantly developing, and also like to mentor other women, other young people, because I think there are mentors for every stage and every part of our life. And whether it was my grandmother early on, when I had my daughter, I never thought that I would become so close to my mother as I did, and
Mm,
just seeing this whole new perspective of motherhood through her eyes after I had given birth to my daughter was an amazing time for me to lean on her. Now, politically, I've really been fortunate to have a lot of amazing mentors. When I worked for Buck, after I left, I had so many other friends that had worked for other members in the legislature, in both the California legislature and in Congress, that didn't have the same experience that I did, that didn't have somebody who they could call and talk to about issues, or who that really listened. One of the things that was most notable for me while I was working for Buck is there was an issue, and I don't even remember the specifics of the issue. It was super simple. I want to say it was no, it was about the statehood of Puerto Rico.
mm,
And Buck had taken one position, and we had gotten several calls from the office about the upcoming vote. And I had sent him a note saying, hey, we have lots of people actually calling about this issue. And he ended up changing his vote. So for me, that was like, this is somebody who, for me, really led by example and led by being a true representative of his district and the voters of his district, right?
yeah.
That was an important learning lesson for me. But I had really amazing mentors and people like Rosario Marin, who was a former U.S. treasurer under Bush 41. Um, she has continued to be a phenomenal friend and mentor for me that helps me in my leadership. She also actually happened to have a son with Down syndrome. So we shared that love and passion for advocating for the special needs community, but also what it's like to be a woman in politics, what it's like to be a Latina in politics, what it's like to be a woman Latina in Republican politics,
Yeah.
right? There hasn't been a lot of us. So she was very formative. And then I continue to have, amazing mentors and friends that help me with the different aspects of my leadership from my campaign, and, friends and new people I've met along the way. Lots of mentors, Corey, lots of
That's
mentors.
awesome. So I want to ask you a personal question. My wife's mom passed away 2 months to the day before we were married, and there were many times, especially once we started having kids, and as Lisa, as we were getting older together, that she wanted to call her mama. So I'm curious. It sounds like your mom got to meet Charlotte. Do I have my dates correct? That's really nice.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Like, how's it been for you having lost your mom? It sounds like, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It sounds like pretty suddenly. How you doing with it?
Grief comes in waves. And as a matter of fact, on July 31st, I was looking at the date here today. Yeah, July 31st, it will have been 6 years since my mom passed away. So my mom passed away when Charlotte was 15 months old.
Mm,
And, my mom, I had really severe, actually, postpartum depression after I'd had Charlotte. And I leaned on my mom quite a bit. And my mom watched Charlotte, helped me. Well, Charlotte was little. She watched her every Friday, and they had a great relationship. And that was for me, especially as was diagnosed originally in 2012, was in remission for 6 years, and then her cancer came back. So when it came back, I was just so happy that I was able to have shared my daughter with my mother.
Yeah.
But it's hard and it continues to be hard. And I try and bring my mom up as much as I can with my daughter, Charlotte. She asks about her all the time. We talk about Nana. She called my mom Nana, but she doesn't really remember her because
Yeah.
how much do you remember when you were, 2 years old?
Right.
So it becomes very intentional for me to remind Charlotte of who my mom was and to introduce her during her different phases of life. But I want to call my mom all the time,
Yeah.
especially to be like, Mom, was I this sassy? Did I talk back this much? What is going on?
That's that is awesome. Well, in a lot of ways, we are the legacy of our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents. Just like we've been talking about your great grandparents and your grandmother. Everybody. We are standing on their shoulders and carrying on that story and that legacy. So I really applaud you for that. I did have a few businessy-ish questions. That's something where I think your time in the state assembly, you were an advocate for folks like me, for small business owners, folks who lead small and medium-sized businesses. How do you see the business climate here in Santa Clarita or California more broadly? What have you seen that you wanted to address when you were first in the assembly and now that you're running for state senate?
Yeah. So you know this, when you run a small business, when you run a nonprofit, you're running a small business,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
was really fortunate to have been able to have ran, Southern California Autism Speaks, where we had, multi-million dollar budget to running Little Steps of Faith Preschool, which had a couple $100,000 budget, right? Two very different scenarios in terms of running a business. So Autism Speaks, I had HR. I had, someone I could depend on in admin. And, I could call a plumber. At Little Steps of Faith, I was HR. I was the plumber. Like I'm, plunging little tiny toilets, the little tiny toilets that the little 3-year-olds use. They're kind of cute, but it's still pretty gross.
Yeah.
I've seen both sides of, it's the micro size business and small business and what it's like to, have to run a business under California rule and law. Let's just be real. I'm going to call it rule because that's how most businesses feel, right? Like we have a ruler right now, which is Sacramento. That makes it hard to do business here. So the way that California regulations, taxes impact small businesses are very different than the way they impact the Amazons of the world. So for me, continues to be really important for there to be a voice. And this is a prime example. When I was in the legislature, two moments that I was at the forefront of saying, hey guys, look over here, we got a problem. The first was, I was elected during COVID. We small business, micro businesses that were able to survive, we all did what we were, asked to. We stayed home. We applied for our PPP loans. Well, in the state of California, we hadn't codified federal law, so our small businesses were going to be taxed on those PPP loans. And I was like, hold up. We can't do this. Like our small businesses, yeah, they received loans, but they're still barely getting by, right? We need to make sure that they're not taxed on this money. So I was one of the first voices in the legislature because I was a business who did take out a PPP loan, who understood, what the tax implications could be, that needed to happen. And I was one of the voices at the forefront of that. So we made sure businesses weren't taxed. Another thing that I proposed was super common sense. You've seen it. You try and be the best employer, possible. You don't want any, violations. You want to make sure that you're not just firing people discriminately, right? Like you're taking those right steps. But a lot of times when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to disability, there are some bad actors out there that want to take advantage of the system. So, that hurts micro and small businesses who have employees, right? If you're having to deal with unemployment fraud or disability fraud as a business owner, it costs you money and time. So super simple. I was like, hey, why don't we say that at the bottom of all of our applications for unemployment, we put under penalty of perjury, right? If you're telling somebody, if you're telling somebody you are signing this under the penalty of perjury, there could be consequences for you lying. That seems pretty common sense. That could and would deter, fraud. but they wouldn't pass it, right?
Hmm.
And part of the issue is in Sacramento is that not enough of the legislators up there understand what it's like to run a business. What the difference of, and I use this example, it wasn't really a problem, but there are bigger examples, is in the childcare industry, you have to have a pad of a certain thickness in order to get your license approved for a changing pad for when you're changing children. Well, our pad was like, I want to say it was a quarter of an inch short, which wasn't a big deal. Like we went and bought another one.
Yeah.
But it's just things like that where you're like, give me a break. Like
Right.
you're going to postpone a license. This is going to take another month, and when you're trying to start a business, like a month is a lot when
Yeah.
you're wanting to make sure you have that capital or money in the bank to grow your business.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, and there are a lot of these entities, government adjacent or extensions of government entities that really have no oversight. So it's you feel like you're banging your head against the wall. What seems to make perfect sense to you, or even just like in our case, we submit the same set of information time and time and time and time again, and they're like, "Well, we're going to fine you because you didn't provide this information." Well, yeah, except for the 7 times that I just sent it to you. Anyway,
And
not that
Corey,
I.
you're absolutely right. You bring up a really good point. One of the biggest issues I see as a business owner and somebody in business in California is this lack of oversight and accountability when
Yeah.
it comes to the unelected agencies.
Right.
And just look at the trucking industry. You can look at any, construction industry where it's CARB or it's, Air Quality Resource Board that are continually moving the goalpost on the
Yeah.
regulations, right? Which costs them millions of dollars, certain
Yeah.
businesses, which put them out of business, right? And
Absolutely.
those are just laws and regulations. They're not laws, they're regulations that are set by an unelected body. It's not going through the legislature.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of us are just doing the best we can. I talk about C Spot Go, our window clean and pressure washing company, and me and Brandon are just doing the best we can to survive another day. And we don't have the resources for all this lawfare and big HR departments, but we have great resources. Whether it's Brian Kegley or Serena, just people that we've relied upon for great advice to set up as good of an infrastructure as we can to provide the best experience for our people, our team that we're really proud of, and a great opportunity. But sometimes we feel like we're excuse the expression, but pissing in the wind, So I hope that doesn't give us an explicit rating. Maybe I'll bleep that out. Anyway, okay. So here's a tough question for you. Here's a tough question for you. Taking the L. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about some of your successes and some of your challenges that you've overcome. Tell me about one of your biggest losses or mistakes. Maybe it's the losing the race for re-election for the state assembly in 22, or it was such a tightly contested election, or maybe it was something else. But how did you take the L, and what did you learn from it?
So my big L, probably the most notable was losing my assembly race. We lost my seat by 522 votes. And it was—
Not that you don't remember the exact number.
Everyone should know.
Yeah.
Everyone who knows me should know, because I bring it up all the time.
Yeah.
Even to my current team, I'm like, guys, 522. And they just roll their eyes at me.
Can we knock on one more door today? Knock on one more door. That's one of the 522.
Yeah. And that's like, so that was definitely one of the hardest losses for me. There's 2, actually. I'm going to say, that loss, and I'm not comparing them, but they're big moments for me. And the loss of my mom, right? Like, and her as a big part of my life. So, but my loss in my state assembly race, I call it a loss, but not a defeat, because we went from a district that I first won election in that Biden had carried by about 6 points. And the Democrats had about, I think, an 8 or 9 point voter registration advantage, to a district that Biden had won by 16.3 points. And they had almost a 14-point voter registration advantage. Yet we only lost by 522.
Yeah.
I think had it been any other candidate who, wasn't from the community, who, wants to put politics aside and just solve problems.
Yeah.
Who isn't a jerk, right? There are too many jerks in politics. There's too much toxicity in politics, right? I truly represented my district, and any other person probably would have been trounced. Any other Republican would have been trounced, that cycle, pretty clearly. But 522.02% of the vote, in my book, that's a win. That says that we had a lot of people that crossed over to vote for me, and almost 50% of the district was new.
Yeah.
So it was the first time they'd ever had the opportunity to vote for a Republican in a decade or two, probably. And then, but that loss, Corey, had I been in the legislature the past 2 years, I wouldn't have had the time to meet and connect with the amazing people in Senate District 23. I just couldn't have been here as much as I needed to ensure that we have a win come November for the Senate seat, November 2024. Similar thing with my mom. It was one of the most devastating losses for me, and it was fast. It was ugly. Pancreatic cancer I don't wish it upon my worst enemy. It is ugly. And I leaned into my faith more than ever. And my family prayed every day for a miracle for my mom. And we didn't get the miracle that we had asked for, but at every moment we got the miracle that we needed. And for me, it made me a stronger person. It made me lean into my faith. It made me, love my family more, appreciate family more. And at the end of the day, it taught me, Corey, that I can get through anything. Yeah. You can throw anything at me. I can deal with it. I can get to the bottom of it with grace and, with love and with the energy to move forward.
No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to mankind, if you will, or humankind. Yeah. But God is faithful. He'll give you, he'll equip you with what you need. Another word for tempting, no temptation, is also testing. No testing has overtaken you, but such as is common to human beings. So I really love that. I really appreciate that. And I see how you're tying those two together. Our life isn't a set of buckets, individual buckets. Our life is more of a fabric, a weave, if you will. So I really appreciate how you weave two distinct experiences together and take, move forward in a stronger way, in a deeper way. So before we start to let our Voices of Business audience go, do you have any questions for me?
No. Well, yeah, actually I do have questions. As somebody who is asking for your vote in Senate District 23, what would you say that the state of California could do to help your business thrive more easily? Not that you're not going to work hard, you work hard. Is there one thing that we could do, or is it a multitude of things? I
think it's a multitude of things. I think there are, I really do appreciate voices like what Scott Wilk has been in the Senate now for 2 terms. He's, as I mentioned, he's terming out. You're running for his seat. I think we need, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, frankly, or independents, I think we need more voices in the state legislature who understand the difference between small business owners like me versus, business owners like Mark Zuckerberg. We are not the same. Our resources are not the same. The fights that we're having just to get through to live another day are not the same. So understanding that, as well as understanding the basics, some of the conversations I've had, and this doesn't characterize Christy Smith when she was in the Assembly, by the way. I love the fact that even though she and I disagreed on a lot of policy, we had a lot of policy disagreements. I love the fact that she had me in her room in the Small Business Committee, not just representative for lip service, but I saw that she worked language into legislation that she was supporting that I advocated for. So even if we disagree on 75 to 90% of this stuff, just the fact that someone is hearing my voice as a small business owner and actively trying to find something that we can work into legislation. In that case, it was, I think it was legislation that had to do with the schedule of minimum wage increase, which theoretically I'm in favor of, everybody making a great living, of course, but we have to find a way to, basically the way I described it to the LA County Board of Supervisors was like, look, I agree with you in theory, but the math doesn't agree with you, so help me balance our P&L, So just having someone who knows what a frickin' P&L is, you know? So I think those things would be really helpful. But in particular, I think there's a certain kind of politician. It's one of the reasons that, listen, I have no qualms saying that I'm a huge supporter of yours and one of the reasons is because you don't see your Democratic colleagues as the enemy. You see them indeed as colleagues, as your neighbors that you have policy differences with, but maybe there's some work to be done, as proven by the fact that you helped to start the Problem Solvers Caucus in the state legislature. So those are a few of the things that I'd love to see in our local and state elected officials. And one of the biggest reasons that I'm an unabashed fan of yours. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. You're giving me some ideas.
All right, awesome. Well, we could talk about that offline, but before we let the Voices of Business audience go, we'll talk some more politics and religion here in a second. How can folks find you and find more information about your campaign and all the great work that you're doing?
Yes. So please visit my website at SuzetteValladares.com. And Corey, you're absolutely right, which is why I was a founding member of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. We don't need elected representatives that just want to go in and be partisan, right? We need people that are going to roll up their sleeves, get to work to fix the issues facing California, whether it's the rise in crime, the lack of affordability, the anti-business climate. Let's just be real. What is happening in California is suffocating small and micro business. That's got to stop. But we just need common sense people willing to step up and say, hey, we can do this better. You can visit my Instagram at Suzette Valladares, SuzetteValladares.com. Make a contribution, sign up to volunteer, get out and vote. And if I'm not in your area, get out and vote for, someone who aligns with moving people forward and moving business forward and being a voice for business.
Yeah, get to know your state and local officials, see what they're all about, see what they really stand for. They, in a lot of ways, they affect our lives on a day-to-day basis a lot more than some of the national figures do. So we'll put some of those links in the show notes. And as always, follow, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us at The Voices of Business on social media. You can follow me at Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan. We love to have you and other business and community leaders join in on this conversation. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on The Voices of Business.